Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Neel and Jordan podcast. Hope you had a great Valentine's Day. This is the podcast where two comedians talk like experts on subjects they are not experts on. This podcast is very proudly sponsored by Crush Organic CBD oil. That's Crush with a K. Go to crushorganics.com. Use the code NEEL for 40% off. I've been using their platinum oil for months now. It has done wonders for my sleep. It has eased. It has definitely palliated some of my anxiety and tiredness and all the negative things associated with being a millennial or Gen Z. And I can't recommend them enough. So go to crushorganics.com. Use the code NEEL for 40% off. And if you haven't used it before, start off with 2 to 3 drops. Wait a couple of hours, see how you go. We have shows on sale. Jordan's doing a tour all over the country. Go to his website to check out where he's performing next. I've got regular shows in Sydney, Melbourne, and Newcastle. And we have a wide range of great stand-up comedians that you probably haven't heard of, but they deserve to be heard. And we will feature them. We'll also do some improv. So come see us the first Sunday of every month in Melbourne. And I think it's the third Sunday of every month in Newcastle. And soon some more cities added. All right. Oh, and if you'd like to ask us a question, send in a shout out or a topic, go to neelkolhatkar.com/podcasts. And all that money goes to charity. We raised over $5,000 for charity last year.
No, so, good on you, Neel.
Thank you very much. It was the listeners. I added a little bit, but it was all you guys. So good on you guys for doing that.
Yeah.
Hope it was worth your while with our answers.
I hope so too.
I'm sure it was. We're pretty good. I think.
Sure.
We're all right. We do the job.
I know we're going to get hit in here, but yeah, yeah. You said it. I'll cheer you on the sidelines on that one. It's just every time I ever say anything like that, I just know that there's going to be a bunch of people being like, "Oh, you said you're good. You actually suck." Okay.
I think you read too much of the criticism of you.
I can't online. Not. There's too much of it.
Did you see the Jordan Peterson and Joe Rogan podcast?
No.
Oh, I saw it. Of course I did. And very fair assessment of what Jordan was wearing. He looked like a Bond villain or a Batman villain. He was in a tux with a bow tie.
Legend.
And he was his usual stoic, serious self. And he'd like randomly look Joe in the eye when he was being very serious. And then he'd like go on about whatever he was talking about and suddenly talk very seriously. It's not that simple. It's death. It's death. Everything comes back to like death and chaos. I was actually trying to seek out valid criticism of that podcast because there's a lot that was going to be said about it, inevitably. And every video, the criticism, it started with some sort of snarky comment about like, bros and incels everywhere were celebrating because, and it's just, I can't take this criticism seriously when you're just going to,
they're not going to have a serious
with these personal attacks about people who really look up to these guys. And, I just want to hear a methodical breakdown of where he got things wrong because it was a 4.5 hour podcast. There were also things that I definitely raised eyebrows over. But Alex made a great point. Why do women hate a man who is telling men, get your act together and commit to one woman? Why do women hate that? That's what he's saying. And women are like, you're sexist. It's like, what do you want, man? This is a guy who is influencing men to get their act together, get a job, stop smoking weed, stop watching porn, to take responsibility and commit to one woman. Isn't that a good thing for you as a class? But the way he says it, it's not. Look, let's be pragmatic about this. It's not necessarily about how it makes you feel about the way someone says something. What is the consequence of those views being expressed? And the consequence is a lot of men are committing to one woman, getting married, getting their act together, choosing not to cheat, not to do drugs. Why? He's your savior.
Yeah.
If anything, women should love him more than men.
That's actually really true. Look, I don't think that it is women that hate him. It is a specific subsect of woman and beta that hate him. And it is because in the beta's case, they know that they just can't live up to his standards. And I think that the woman that doesn't like him is a piece of shit. They're just trashy pieces of crap. And I think it's the same thing with the guy as well. He's just a trashy piece of crap, but he's a weak, trashy piece of crap. Okay. And I think that both of them, and you know what I think both of it always comes down to? Every time I ever see anyone criticizing Jordan Peterson, all I see is some 10-year-old going, "Fuck off, Dad! I want my fucking PlayStation back!" That's all I see. Because it's just, he is the father figure of the internet.
Yeah.
And every time I always just see some douchebag in coloured sunglasses sitting there with a smug facial expression on, and you think, wow, I'm sure you were just a treat to raise as a kid.
Well, it's just very interesting when the criticism towards people who like him is always, you know, they're incels and they can't get laid. And he's saying you should change that and not be resentful.
Yeah.
So even if he does appeal to incels, someone's got to appeal to them. Someone should try and change what they like, which is actually, I want to talk about that on this podcast. Yeah, my favorite topic.
Incels.
Incels. But revisiting
it.
I've done a specific one on that on this podcast for about 2 years. And I think that's still the most viewed one on YouTube.
Always.
You know when you look up Australian incel on YouTube, 5 of the videos on the front page are me.
Damn.
Yeah.
This was your deep dive. You've been thinking about this a lot.
Oh, I mean, it's been just a.
It's actually because the internet has been the internet was thinking about it a lot.
Yeah.
Specifically incels though, they were specifically thinking about loser men that can't get laid.
Yes, modern dating is something I'm obsessed about, and the sort of cultural dynamics that come with that. But the best criticism I've seen of Jordan Peterson. The best was Philosophy Tube. Did a sort of 20-plus minute breakdown. She. I think they're a trans woman. Yeah, look, they did a very good sort of methodical, fair-minded breakdown of where he missteps on certain things. And they made a point at the start to say, look, I'm not going to attack the fans. I know he's changed a lot of people's lives. This is where I believe he gets the philosophy wrong, or this is where he sort of waffles on. And, you know, when he does talk about climate change, for example, there's a lot of abstractions. Now, it goes over my head intellectually because I don't know, when he speaks in these elaborate abstractions, is this a man who is just so beyond me intellectually that I just can't comprehend what he's saying? Or the criticism is that, yeah, it's just sophistry. He's being unnecessarily esoteric when he could just get to the point and be far more specific. I know Carl Kalinske has that criticism of him when he talks about God, and he sort of has this very broad idea. When he's asked, do you believe in God? It's, for most people, that's a yes or no answer, where he says, you know, it depends what you mean by God. And that's fair. I think he's being honest. His interpretation of God, because I'm actually reading Maps of Meaning. Man, that is his magnum opus. That one is way better than those. I didn't like 12 Rules of Life or the other one. But
wait, Maps of Meaning is good.
Yes. That's his.
So it's
really breaks everything down there. That's his whole philosophy.
But it's not absurd. Not absurd. Is it like abstract? Is it really abstract?
It's abstract, but I think when he commentates on culture and morality, I think you need. It's good to be abstract because you want to deal with the complexities of human behavior, why we behave, archetypes, stories, and myths. And and I think there was a code where it was a sort of quote that I remember. I think even bookmarking, which was something like, I can't remember. I'm not going to be able to say this exactly, but good behavior is encoded in speech. Speech is then encoded into myths into stories into religion. And that's also embodied by God. Look, it's just a much more sort of complex interpretation of stories, and particularly religious stories. And, you know, I think the abstractions there are just really meaningful and deep. However, when he goes on abstractions about climate change, that's different to culture and morality. And I don't think him sort of going on for 30 minutes and sort of making these remarks about, relating it to certain parables is really doing the issue justice there. I think then it can come across as like, okay, what do you do? This is science here. You need to just be direct about what you're saying. Now, it's not just science, because there's so many related ideas, as we discussed, I think, 2 podcasts ago, where you've got philosophy related to climate change, economics related to it, personal identity related to it, psychology, all these things. So he's right to say, hey, it is more complicated, but on the issue of the science itself, it shouldn't. But again, he's so far. This is such an intelligent man where I don't know if I'm just these intellectual concepts are completely going over my head, or I'm falling for the grift. Who the fuck knows? But
well, I really don't like that criticism of him that people say
he's a grifter.
Well, I just hate the phrase grifter because it's a really annoying thing to say. Yeah, exactly. But they say. In fact, actually, I think it was Milo Yiannopoulos that said this criticism the best, which was, as a journalist, you kind of get where people are going because there's only so many cookie cut beliefs in the world.
Uh-huh.
And when it comes to Jordan Peterson, like, he's just like, I've listened to, like everyone else, dozens and dozens of hours of lectures with that man, and I still can't tell you what his fucking worldview is. And it's because the way that he speaks, as you're saying, like, it just keeps just dragging out and like takes a long time to get to like a very basic point. And we'll go through, just these very elaborately constructed sentences to get there. And it's always this thing at the end of, did you mean this or did you mean this? And you can interpret it either way. But I argue that is because
he's thought about it extremely deeply.
It's thought about it extremely deeply. I also think it's because most people aren't as creative as him. I truly do think that he is highly creative. And
yeah,
so that's what you're kind of watching when you're looking at him, right? He's an artist. He's sort of an artist. That's why he's interesting to listen to, because he's got a different perspective on things. And so what if everything he says isn't concrete? Like, why does that matter? Like, everyone else watches, as we were just saying before, you watch these debates for entertainment purposes. And if that just annoys you or whatever, then yeah, you can tune out. But it's just amazing to me the level of criticism this man receives.
Yeah.
And as you're saying, like, it's always just, I suppose because he's just definitely well planted into the culture war, but I really feel like 99% of his criticism is purely cultural. It's like you can look at someone and think, that person's going to hate Jordan Peterson.
Yeah, that's very true.
Don't you reckon?
Yeah.
And that's it.
It's also like criticism, which is just, you're all the incels that listen to him. That is projection at its finest.
And it's always rooted in, like, even though they're talking about, yes, yeah, for sure, because they always are fucking, like, every person that is always saying the incels, you look at them and you think, are you getting laid?
Yeah, exactly.
You're not, are you?
All right, like, okay, whatever. Even if the people who do like him are incels, you're not really going after his ideas there.
No.
And then what are you trying to say? You're saying incels are subhuman to the point where they're not allowed to have someone that they like. Well, I guess the best version of that argument is he's just, I guess, the demagogue of incels, where he's just sort of like, he's, indulging their resentment and sort of justifying their resentment by blaming progressive culture, and he's ultimately doing it for money and grifting. And I mean, look, he's a very good actor then, because he gets so passionate and often tearful when he speaks, and that clearly is a man who firmly believes what he's saying, or he's an amazing actor.
Either or, but I think that the message of it, and obviously I'm not him, so I can't speak well for him, but what I get from it all the time is, yeah, okay, he's getting to, and people are always saying, there's the two basic criticisms. He's not talking about anything concrete, or those same people will say, everything he says is obvious.
Which one is it?
Which one fucking is it then? Which one do you actually hate? You just hate him. But let's just move it back from that. Good. I'm glad that he's saying these obvious things. You need to be reminded of obvious things constantly. And the general thing that I get from all of his climate change stuff, which who cares really, like the namby-pamby stuff that he's talking about with climate change, whatever. There's a million other people that you should be more angry at than Jordan Peterson for his views on climate change. At the core of it, he is essentially saying, and we were talking about this a few podcasts before, but I just need to reiterate this. He's saying, it's complicated, but he's also saying, dude, you are not going to change anything about fucking climate change. You specifically, okay, you can do your general things of voting for a different party. You can do you can put solar panels on and things like this, but this is an international problem that is getting solved by people that are far more capable than you. You focus on something more local about your local environment. That is actually the best thing that you can do about climate change. That is the best thing that you can do. He's always just constantly saying, focus on your locus of control. I think that really, when I hear him getting mad about climate change, it's actually something that I've gotten more mad about the older I get. And I can't say that I'm perfect on this. I've definitely been in that same realm of just like, oh yeah, we got to convince the UN to do things and that kind of shit. But at the core, he's just being like, dude, you give a shit about this, okay? Go organise a community garden. Get competent enough to make sure that that community garden has shifts so the lettuce doesn't die and is constantly getting watered and fertilised. And then you can move on to something else from there.
Oh, that point I totally agree with. And I really admire the way he articulates that.
It's sick. I love that.
When he talks about the science of it in abstract ways, it's... Although he was on that, he worked for the UN and he read far more books on it than I have. So okay, so he was making the points that, hey, I think the best thing we can do is try and alleviate global poverty. And that is maybe the best thing we can do for the environment, because there are studies that show as people move up the economic mobility ladder, they care more about the environment. They're not just focused on themselves and when their next meal is coming. Having said that, there's also a huge need for collective action on an issue as complex as this. And you can move a lot of people up to the middle and even upper middle class. Australia's the perfect example. There's plenty of people who are in the middle and upper middle class who, on average, they probably care about the environment more. There's plenty who also don't.
And we're also the biggest polluters per capita. Well, maybe someone else has taken that title, but we're like very high up.
Yeah, I mean, that's the lifestyle, and a lot of people having large houses that in other countries would be living in tiny little shacks.
Yeah.
This is the lucky country, man.
Really
Modi said it the best. He came here in 2014, I think, and he's like, this is the one country where the plumber can live next door to the politician.
Mm.
Yeah, that does not happen in other countries.
Else. No, not even New Zealand.
No, if you're working class, there's a much greater class divide. If anything, you almost have inherent status here by being working
blue
class
collar,
because you're not a wanker.
Yeah,
but in other that's an aberration. That's not the norm in every other country.
No,
and this is a fascinating culture in Australia. It's almost like a sort of very blue collar, less intellectual version of Christian morality, because Christian morality, it's all about whatever. What's that quote? A rich man. It's easier for something to happen than for a rich man to get into heaven. From what I've heard, in parts of Ireland that are very notably Catholic, they just actually denigrate successful people, and they have a sort of tall poppy syndrome based on a Christian morality, whereas Australia's sort of adapted that but taken the intellectual side out of it and been rather than saying like, well, it's easier for the camel to what's the fucking
get into
quote?
The needle of an eye of a needle
than for a rich man to get into heaven. Oh, you sound like a wanker. I just reckon rich people are cunts. Like, that's just Australia's just been the convict version of that.
I love it. I love the attitude of this country.
I like it. Look, the tall poppy syndrome, I got two. There's a good and bad of it. When it gets to the extreme level, it does really circumscribe the potential for not just success, but for innovation and intelligence to flourish, and for just sort of really good things to come about. But at the same time, it mollifies arrogance and narcissism and ego, which if you go to America, they're all about this is the land of opportunity where you can make it, and there's a lot of egotistical people there. Whereas you come to Australia, sure, there's probably less egomaniacs, but I wonder if, there's a lot of people who didn't live up to their full potential. There's good and bad to every cultural phenomenon. I think for the average person, this country is great, but if you're sort of a very gifted and talented person, maybe America's better. I don't know. But then again,
I don't
know. Like the Djokovic thing. I'm a big Djokovic fan, and everyone here hates it. They're like, "Oh, he's arrogant." He's just confident. He's not arrogant. People think he's arrogant because he has a Serbian accent and he, looks people in the eye. Like, no, he's just confident, bro. Like, where is he said, I am the number one, I am the best? He's always like, yes, I played good tennis today and I thought it was a very good match. Like, he's not.
Really? Because I've never even watched it. I don't know what he looks like.
I don't think he's arrogant.
Right.
Okay, so he didn't have his vaccine passport or whatever the fuck. And then, the typical criticism is like, he's no better than me. He has to obey the same rules as I do. It's like, okay, he's objectively better than you. Okay. He's one of the best tennis players, maybe the best tennis player to have ever played the game. I think we could have given him an exception. But I'm in a very small minority. Everyone on social media.
I really don't understand how this got so passionate.
Goodbye, cunt. Just let the guy play. Like, what's it going to... I understand the value of the rules, and if you sort of ease them for him, and then there are people who maybe have family members that they haven't been able to visit.
But the passion.
Oh my God. Like, just let the guy... And then Nadal, now it's changed the course of tennis history.
Where?
Because Nadal, Federer, and Djokovic were all on 20 Grand Slams each. All of them should have pretty much retired. Well, maybe not Djokovic because he's 34, but in any other era, Nadal and Federer would have definitely retired. The only reason they haven't is because they're chasing the elusive greatest Grand Slam winner of all time. I wouldn't retire either if I were them. And Djokovic was the favourite to win the Australian Open. He probably would have, considering Nadal beat Medvedev in 5 sets and just sort of scraped that victory through. I mean, you've changed... Whoever made that decision has changed the course of tennis history, potentially.
You know what, though? Look, I think it feels like fate that should have happened then.
I thought... I don't know. But I'm definitely in a minority. It was something like 80% of Australians were yeah, fucking dickhead. But
yeah, there was serious fervour about it.
Let the guy play, man. Fuck.
Yeah, you are right. Australia is definitely a society that values fairness. That's bred into our bones.
Yes.
America is definitely bred into their bones to value unfairness, aren't they?
No, I don't know about that. I think there's different conceptions of fairness. So fairness can be seen as everyone getting an equal slice of the pie, or this is very rudimentary, simplistic ideas about it, but everyone getting an equal slice of the pie. That's one version of fairness. Everyone getting a slice of the pie commensurate to the effort and value they've put in and added to the society. That's another idea of fairness. That's the American idea of fairness. The Australian idea of fairness is probably a mixture of the two, really. Yeah,
but okay, just in terms of the rudimentary idea that you have, and obviously there's all individuals there and they all have their own ideas, but the idea is Australia celebrates the fair go. Right. In America, there's kind of seems to be this attitude of, okay, in Australia, we worship the underdog. If we see like a homeless person, it's not necessarily we're going to give him money or anything, but you're just like, fuck, that guy's having a rough one, Whereas in America, it's kind of just like, get a job, you bum. Hey, really? You want a quarter? How about you go get a job? There's that kind of attitude.
A caricature. I don't think Americans are actually like that.
That's what I'm saying. The caricature of Australia is that. The caricature of America is that.
I think the caricature that Americans would maybe think of Australia, or like the rest of the world, are like they yobbos. Because again, like I said on that Asian podcast, any immigrant basically just thinks all Australians are bogans. Like what Australians? They understand there's like a subset that are the bogans, but every other immigrant is like, oh, they drink so much and hardly work. That's
wait. What's the stereotype of America then?
I guess the sort of negative stereotype of it would be just a cocky and
money obsessed.
money obsessed and fat.
Yeah, fat, money obsessed, stupid,
Yeah, stupid as
Arrogant.
well. Yeah.
fat. Fuck, such a negative stereotype. Ours is
Damn.
way better. It's so much more endearing. Just dumb bogans.
Yeah.
They
yeah.
like beer and sport and they're dumb. And they're not
trade-offs.
fat, they have a gut.
There's trade-offs to every society. That there's good and bad to every society. So I suppose with America, you kind of really can harness the talents of the top 0.1% of people who are just the most gifted and intellectually capable, and that's why there's a brain drain. Even still to this day, all the best people at universities will tend to go to end up in America. I know from India that like the best talent ends up in America. But it's obviously also a very the gap between rich and poor is quite expansive.
I'll tell you what though, that is
it's
also
not a comfortable life for the average person. But in
No.
Australia, it's a very comfortable life.
For the average person.
Comparatively, it's
To the rest
a
of the
much
world,
more comfortable
easily.
life for the average person.
Yeah.
But there's probably maybe because of the culture, but maybe also because of the system, it's not. It's a tough one. You don't really know whether this is true or not. It's hard to compare because our population is so much smaller. But a lot of very gifted and talented people also end up in America who might be Aussies. And
But that's the thing. It definitely look when you're talking about talented and gifted to going to America. Arguably, the arts, finance sector, absolutely. But in terms of things like science and academia, they're going to Europe and China.
oh, okay.
So it really just depends on what you value. Yeah.
All I'm sure some would go to America, right?
Some would go to America, and they do go to America, and I do know scientists that go to America, but I know more scientists that go to China, and I know more scientists that go to France.
Well, anyway, my point still stands. They're leaving Australia.
They're leaving Australia, but it's just interesting that what brains they're trying to harvest,
Right.
That's what's interesting. And it just really plays more into the stereotype that America's fucked, Like, who are they trying to attract? People that are, particularly talented at making supercomputers that can predict day trading better than someone else's supercomputer. That's what they're interested in.
Yeah, okay. Sure. I mean, that's very cynical. Like, yeah, okay, there's a huge profit incentive for a lot of those top science graduates, but don't you think there's also, I don't know, someone like Elon Musk? I don't know, people have very mixed views about him, but that's someone who clearly went to America. His talents were harnessed and sort of propagated the most in that particular country. He has benefited that country the most, and there's a reason he didn't stay in South Africa.
Well, I mean, Jesus fuck. Who would?
Good luck, yeah.
Yeah.
Right now. Quite a mess from what I've heard. Ugh.
Yeah, you'd move anywhere that you could otherwise. And yes, he is into Silicon Valley. That's definitely true. Silicon Valley is an offshoot, though, of the fact that the US's military complex is just so much better funded than anyone else's. And obviously that bleeds over to microchips.
Right. Yeah, of course, this is much more complicated than just the culture of tall poppy syndrome versus enterprise. But
it is just interesting. It's interesting that,
culture makes a difference. Yeah.
It fucking does.
It does, yeah. But what did I want to talk about? Yeah. So, 2 years ago, I did that Incel podcast.
Oh, yeah.
And been talking about it a lot on Sexcel. I don't want to specifically just talk about incels, but now this is no longer a topic of conversation that is just restricted to manosphere blogs. A lot of, mainstream sources aren't necessarily talking about it, but a lot of podcasts that I admire, and this could be an algorithm particularly targeting me, who the hell knows, but podcasters who are not incels or neckbeards by any means, at least they don't seem like it, are talking about the very unequal market, they often use the analogy of a market of today's dating environment, and how there's just this continued growth of men who are checking out from dating, who are just constantly being rejected, are having absolutely no success with online dating. And the average woman is sort of going for this smaller proportion of men who are at the top of various status hierarchy. There's various measures you can employ, and people get so upset when you even just talk about this. I'm not personally attacking anyone. Yet I think the incel thing is far more nuanced, where, yes, there are a lot of men who just sort of don't even try or don't even attempt to do things and use modern culture as an excuse. But at the same time, how much can you constantly tell some people, keep bettering yourself, keep self-improving, when for years they've been trying that, they've been doing what they can, and maybe they got a bad luck in the genetic lottery. And maybe they're not particularly intelligent. Maybe they're not particularly good looking. Now, again, that's not an excuse. You can still, but they may be not particularly socially intelligent as well. So they can't just pick up on something like charisma or, certain social cues. And anyway, you could argue there are certain like systemic issues at play now, where very nuanced conversation, because as soon as you sort of admit to something like that, immediately a lot of people, it's an excuse to just not even try, not even bother, just become a simp and pay for someone's OnlyFans. But I just want to revisit it again with you, because it's very interesting talking to you about this. You've now been in a long-term relationship for a very long time. I've now been in a long-term relationship for close to a year. But the trends and what I'm seeing anecdotally among my friend group, man, a lot of men are just like, fuck this. I don't even want to try anymore. And then a lot of women are like, why am I getting fucked over all the time? Where are the good men? The classic complaint. And all the sort of the studies and the analyses of it, because it's very interesting. There's a lot of like complex graphs and things that have been made about this. You had a really good term, I think, on that podcast 2 years ago, which was like, it's basically a sex oligarchy. There's just this very small slither of men that are getting a lot of success, especially in the realm of online dating. And the average man is missing out. And now people are jaded. They're depressed. They have a lot of animosity towards the opposite gender. They're resentful. They're not giving their best selves to their partner. They've got their walls up. They're guarded. And that just makes it worse for the other person. People are damaged emotionally, sometimes even physically. And a lot of people are just opting to stay single. That's not necessarily a bad thing. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. But one, what are the implications for this as a society, as a country? And two, what the hell can we do about it if we do see it as a problem? I put one of those surveys up on my Instagram a couple of weeks ago. Hey, fertility rates are falling all across the developed world. In Australia, I think for an OECD nation, they're still relatively high, but they're not replacement level. The birth rate is not replacement level in Australia. Our population is still growing because of migration. But is this going to be a problem down the line? And as this sort of sex technology continues to advance at exponential rates, already they sell sex robots all over the place. It's just a matter of time before they're mass marketed and accessible to the average 20-year-old guy. And
real enough.
Exactly.
Getting close, actually.
Something's got to give, man. Like, because both genders now, there's almost this sort of gender war, this class warfare, when, there's a lot of talk about double standards from both genders. So women will say, all right, men want this in a woman, but then they get insecure when this happens. Men will often complain about, hey, women are saying they want this, yet all our experiences say the opposite to that. Certain traits are prioritized in as the dating market becomes more casual. I mean, did you actually read Hormonal? Because I told you.
No, I've downloaded the audiobook. Okay. I've just got to finish my other autism hole, but I'm looking forward to that. I actually do think about it a lot.
It's a great, it's such a great book. And yeah, I mean, going on TikTok, it's obviously not real life, not real world, but it's a very sort of, it's just less intelligent, but more snarky and sort of visual, memeified Twitter for Gen Z. That's how it feels. It's just this war on TikTok. A lot of relationship stuff, a lot of this, and I can't help but feel, what is this? Is this China trying to? It's probably good. It's working. They're pitting the genders against each other. This isn't even a race war anymore. This is men versus women now. Like,
but hasn't it always been on the net?
Yeah, but this seems very intense now. This is
because TikTok's fucked it. That's why. It's the next gen. TikTok's the evilest medium.
It's
easily
extreme. No one's listening to each other.
You can't. You're giving the fucking minute.
Of course. I mean, like, you can't. The complaint a lot of women will have is like men have an ego and are not willing to sit down and just listen. And, you know, there's a certain uniqueness that comes with being a female that men will never fully comprehend the emotional reality of that. That's fair enough. But this isn't my opinion. It's true that like your emotional reality is not necessarily the objective reality, and an objective reality or something closer to that is better coordinated and understood through things that we, you know, reason and like studies and these sorts of things. But then also when men say, hey, this is our experience, or like this is what it's like to be a man, there are a lot of women who will just shut down. And there's this narrative that's been sold to especially Gen Z women, where basically any man talking about women is, you know, that's a form of power that he's trying to wield over her. They'll just it's like the Nicole Flint, like that's just Gen Z is just like carbon copies of Nicole Flint. That's how it feels like to me. Again, this could be the algorithm, this could be me falling down an echo chamber, I don't know. But that when you can't, like we decided, you just can't. It's not about arguing, but nothing you say to someone who is so embedded in that self-serving narrative will ever get through.
No.
Nothing you can possibly say.
Christ, no.
There's not even like just a slightly ajar door there for someone to actually consider that maybe something they think about could be wrong or flawed or could be thought about in a different way. It's just purely seeing everything through the lens of their subjective reality, which is like, man on the internet criticizing me, sexism, power, unfairness. That's just, you can just not
form
get through.
Of rape.
Just not,
yeah.
Okay. I don't know about that, but like that you can not get through to someone like that. And now there's this whole community of men that are just like that on the other side of the spectrum. And there are some podcasts out there now that, don't get me wrong, hilarious, entertaining. Like that's what, Fresh and Fit, hilarious, very entertaining. But it's, you know, it's McDonald's for relationship podcasts, right? It's just two guys saying what a lot of young guys probably want to hear to feel vindicated about their experiences they've had with women. And yeah, monogamy, I've realized, is actually, it's not natural, which not many people are disputing that. But you should, I think for the good of the society, we probably should do it. I do think if like a small percentage of people experiment with open relationships, but in a really authentic and non-egotistical way, much harder said than done. I think that's probably good, because you want to try and experiment with the unknown. You want to try and navigate that and see if there is something better to be discovered there. But for the majority of society, people are just better off if they just pair up and aren't looking outwards to think what's better out there. Hey, I've suddenly got this ick after 3 years, even though my boyfriend's been great. Oh, hey, like I'm no longer sexually satisfied with my girlfriend. Let's just give it up. Because that's a very sort of new version of pair bonding. And it was Esther Perel who said this well. It was like monogamy used to be one person for life. Monogamy is now one person right now. And, you know, there's just, who was it? Mary Harrington, I think she's a feminist, and she's talking about how the next movement for women will have to be no longer about cultural freedom and liberation. How much more liberation needs to occur, because there's now a lot of option paralysis and sort of existential dread from all the freedom people have, when historically you didn't have to think about it. There wasn't this constant anxiety by the time you hit your mid-20s.
Am I missing out?
Up to, your mid-30s, like, am I missing? What should I do? Is this the right person for me? Am I settling? Are they good enough? No, you just paired off with someone because it was what you did, usually someone from your community. And it wasn't necessarily about love. It was building a life together based on shared values. And it was also, for the country. It was a sort of marriage wasn't this sort of self-serving spiritual adventure. It was almost a civic duty. It was a civic and moral duty. And
which
there was
should be seen as.
Well, whether it should be seen as, we've definitely lost out some of the advantages of that, because we only ever had our eyes on the disadvantages, which is it's restrictive, which it is. It's very restrictive. You don't have a lot of choice. There were sort of strict gender roles associated with that. But now we're at a point where it's, okay, how much more liberation and freedom can we possibly have? And how much more dread and anxiety and depression caused by today's dating market do we need to endure before we start to actually seriously question some of the progressive ideas that we're promulgating as just the right way to think about relationships and sex and marriage?
Especially because it just makes you so self-absorbed. That's the other thing that I really like being about in a monogamous relationship, is that it just cuts all of that out. That part of your life is handled, as you're saying. You don't have to think about it anymore. You have all this brain power that you can move into something else, that if you don't, you're kind of just sitting there trying to satiate carnal desires for the rest of your life. And don't get me wrong, one of my biggest regrets is that I didn't get like a good go at that. I had, not enough time in that frame before I got into a long-term relationship, I don't think. And I think that those people that, get their 4 or 5 years out of that is fine. But then after that, I really think that, at some point, and I do think that it is about your mid-20s, it starts to become a sign of immaturity if you're just constantly playing the field. At some point, you should get to something of, all right, I should settle down. And it isn't even because of the relationship dynamics of it. It is for the rest of your life. It's for every other area of your life. There's a bunch of things that you need to do as a human being. And a lot of those get ticked off as soon as you put that in. And one of the big things that Jordan Peterson's always talking about is being in a monogamous relationship weds you to responsibility. It's sort of the same thing as pets. I think that a really good indicator is getting a cat or a dog. Can you look after the cat or a dog correctly? Because it's a one-to-one relationship. Anyone that I've ever seen that is a shit dog owner is a shit parent. I've never seen it the other way around. They're always fucking terrible. And it's because, it's that same thing with the relationships, I suppose. It's just like it ties you down to something. It makes you a more serious person. That's the other thing you're saying, is that it's more of a...
But I don't think there's necessarily a shortage of people who yearn to be in monogamous, healthy, fulfilling relationships. But a lot of this, again, anecdotal, but the statistics do back this up to an extent. People aren't being satisfied with what's being offered to them on the current dating market, both men and women. A lot of people are saying, this was not good enough, or this other person didn't fulfill what I was looking for. And, that podcast I was just listening to before you came in, that was actually, a friend of mine sent that to me, and that was 2 religious women from America who were talking about how flooding the market with, again, these market analogies. I know people get mad at it because it's sort of dehumanizing it, but it's the best way to think about it.
It is the way to think about
what
that.
it is. And don't, you're taking things too serious. It's childish to have this
economic.
Like fairy tale version about no, I'm looking for this it's special. It's human to me. It's like, all right, yes, but the aggregate result of everyone looking for their special someone is essentially a market. So, okay, anyway, but what's happened here is it's for some men, not all, but it's far easier to get laid than it would have been without having to pay for it.
Then in history.
Decades ago. Yeah, throughout when there was a more, I suppose, religion and cultural codes associated around things like that. It's also just a product of a lot of people moving to big cities and having a lot more free time.
Anonymity.
Yeah, and apps that give off the illusion that it's very accessible. And yeah, to be honest, the right needs to, again, I know we don't like that left and right, but in this cultural context, needs to acknowledge that sort of unfettered capitalism here actually has contributed to this, because people aren't sort of taking into account, parables or stories or just advice that is maybe not satiating their immediate urge to feel fulfilled and live out this fairy tale, but instead what's being marketed to people: rom-coms, porn for men, Disney fairy tales, all these things that are just for profit, but are giving people a completely selfish expectations for what love, sex, and relationships are all about. That they're this happy ending and, you get to find your prince or whatever the fuck. And then for porn, sure. I mean, I always speak about how much I sort of dislike it. I do watch it. It's so fucking good. But, what's it doing? Because I can still say, yeah, look, I don't want to, but, man, it's too good. But that just shows once the robots come about, well, we're fucked. But, and a lot of people share this view that I'm having here, but then they're not willing to put it into practice.
No.
And
well, that's the
I
thing.
didn't for a long time either. I was saying all this, but then I was, I was having there was a time there where I had 2 or 3 casual partners. And it was so much fun. I felt like a boss. Really what I was searching for is not just to get laid. I think what a lot of men are also searching for is not just to get laid. It's to be desirable to multiple women. I think that's a very powerful urge that men want to satisfy. It's not just about getting laid. You can go to the brothel, get laid as much as you want.
No, it's ultimate validation.
Every man wants to be kind of a James Bond. That's why, again, James Bond was sort of this fairy tale marketed to older men about this, swashbuckling
45-year-old
hero who could go around and sleep with whichever
26-year-old
he wanted. Yeah. It's like, all right, yeah, look, it's not real, bro. As entertaining as it was. But anyway, so these women on this podcast were talking about how, and by the way, Chris Williamson on Modern Wisdom is fantastic on this. He's done a few recent podcasts about this specific issue. And again, this is what sort of vindicated me in being able to talk about this without, there's always going to be some people who's like, no, just an incels who talk about this. But dude, now it's becoming more mainstream. There's a serious problem here. So yes, basically men that the price they had to incur to get sex is now far less. And as a result, they're not necessarily bettering themselves. The big reason men would better themselves and sort of work towards something historically was ultimately not for power, and yes, status was maybe part of it, but it was to be able to attract a mate and to provide for their children. And the narrative is that men had all this power and, women didn't have access to that, which, okay, it's fair. Women should definitely have access to that. But there was a huge responsibility that came with that as well. And there was this very complex sort of cultural ecosystem that, you've taken all these Jenga pieces out because they were uncomfortable and they were restrictive. And the whole tower is now collapsing because now people, I think, are yearning for a bit of that sort of responsibility, a roadmap, just clear, a clear pathway to have those basic physiological needs met, which is sort of, just security, intimacy, and consistency. Not for everyone. I know some people out there just don't actually, despite culture or whatever, really just want to be individuals and live their own life and do what they want. But I do wonder if a lot of that is just, we're so easily molded by culture. I mean, just 2 years ago, I was like, oh, no, yeah, I think open relationships are the way to go. And now I've switched immediately on that, partly due to some personal experiences, but also because I think there are certain psychological truths that I then discovered about myself. But Jordan's also right in saying the cost to having extra partners. What is that? What are you then sacrificing? You're valuing that, and what are you then putting on a rung below that? And there are now things
because
in
you
my
always
life
have
that
to.
are just there are now things in my life that are just far more important to me. And don't get me wrong, art sometimes come out after a show, and fuck, my girlfriend's probably going to hate me saying this, but there's girls that are like openly flirting with me.
DTF.
I'm like, oh goddamn! But there are just things.
The bane of a famous man's. It really is. It's fucked. But it is. Like I hate that too. I hate that too.
There's just things in your life that are more valuable, and you have to make sacrifice. You can't have everything.
You can't have everything
at the end of the day. And now, a lot of the narratives that sort of men will have is that, hey, women are only looking at this top small percentage of men, and when they say things that they're attracted to, certain traits, yes, it's true that they might be attracted to things like a man who's emotionally intelligent, fashionable, able to cry, and isn't bound by toxic masculinity, which is, first of all, that's a total very simplistic view of what it's like to be a man, which is again another frustration. All right, women hate it when we talk about what it's like to be a woman and how women should act, yet now every woman has an opinion. This is what men should do. Go to therapy. Learn how to cry. Do this. This is exactly what it's like being a man. And it's like, stop being hypocrites. Okay, how about listen to a man talking about what it's like being a man, and don't tell me because you read a few Instagram stories what toxic masculinity is. And, there's this sort of narrative that when men hang out, it's all just like beer and rape jokes and the inability to cry. Like, that's genuinely what a lot of people think men are like.
Mm.
Sure, that stereotype doesn't fall from the sky, but it's like me saying, oh, all women are just like, boys. Like, that's the equivalent of it. Some fucking 14-year-old girls are like that. But that's just such a dumb way of, interpreting something as complex as male behavior. And I was talking to my friends about this today. What I think progressive, I don't want to say that, the feminists, that's such a, it's going to be clipped out of context. But, okay, sort of progressive cultural wisdom gets wrong is that it says, okay, male attitudes towards women are the social construction. So when a man looks at a woman and objective, oh, she's hot, I want to fuck her, or has those sexual impulses and urges, and sometimes acts on it in a way that makes a girl feel controlled or uncomfortable or coerced. That is the social construction. And if we can just sort of take apart these cultural attitudes, we can then ameliorate all the negative male behaviors that are associated with that. And the natural state of any human being is simply to be just this loving, caring person. And it's actually the, whatever you want to call it, the patriarchy or the toxic masculinity that actually changes men from that state into these sort of animals. It's the complete other way around. The natural state of a man, and any man who is denying this has not truly explored themselves in their shadow or whatever.
Well, let's be honest, they're not being honest.
They're not being honest. The natural state for any man is to basically be a predator. Okay? And that's uncomfortable to talk about, but it's true. It's very true. You socialize a man outside of society for 18 to 24 years with no other human contact. You give him food, you give him every other sort of physical need. You bring him into society, he is going to want to rape every fucking woman, okay?
Mm.
Now, I understand how that's a very confronting thing to hear and say, but that is the natural state, okay? Anything that we do that tells us not to act on that, that's the social construction. That is culture. And that is what has now been totally misrepresented and misunderstood by, well-meaning, don't get me wrong, very well-meaning women, but women who don't know what it's actually like to be a man and to actually live with this constant, fucker. Okay, again, this is not by any means an excuse of any man who's acted unscrupulously in this regard, but we have to be honest about the origins of a lot of these problems. Okay, and so this kind of code that existed previously was like, all right, we have to sort of, I guess Western chivalry, if you will, which was like, all right, we sort of act women are the gentler sex and we protect them. And as a result, they then give us their affection and their care and maternal instincts and care for our children. Sure. And then we took away the fact that women had to live up to those traditional gender roles. But what you also took away was the incentive for men to be those protectors and those providers and those carers. Okay. Now, most men would definitely, no, not even most men, 99% of men would say, oh, but that doesn't mean you just automatically act like assholes or whatever. But then there's all these other factors at play. Okay. Sexual selection. Sexual selection in a casualized dating market prioritizes things like the excitement, physical attraction. Those two in particular, first of all, it doesn't prioritize things like sort of consistency, generosity, kindness. That's not attractive in a one-night stand or just for someone in their early 20s who wants to be excited and titillated. And again, it's not my opinion. All right?
It's obvious as well.
Studies that have backed this up. And so there's just this sort of transactional element to the way men and women interact in a society that is completely been lopsided and it's been completely forgotten. I don't know exactly what the solution is, but I agree with, I think her name is Mary Harrington. I can't remember for the life of me. She's fantastic, whoever she is. But the next step of culture can no longer be liberation and like sort of freedom from these supposedly archaic and restrictive norms. No, we have to go back to some new norms and some new restrictions that a part of the sort of totality of not just traditional wisdom, but just wisdom taking into account the current environment, technological and, sexual, and understand that there are certain behaviors that may be uncomfortable in the short term and possibly feel restrictive. But for the health of society and for the health of a relationship in the long term, they are of benefit. And, when you have like all these 15 to 25-year-olds wanting to hook up, or a lot wanting to hook up, getting drunk every weekend, ending up in a room together, they're half inebriated, okay? You run that experiment millions of times every single week with all the variables at play there, the level of alcohol, the level of social awareness that they may have. Yes, and upbringing and culture plays a part in that as well. Okay, you're kidding yourself if you're going to assume like every interaction of those can always be perfectly amicable and everyone can have a comfortable, good time. Now, I know, again, very, very uncomfortable topic to talk about, but we have to. We can't not explore certain areas of this because they're uncomfortable for some people. Now, where I probably disagree with some of the people who were quite vocal about this is I don't think just sort of taking a step a couple of decades back is the way to go. I think there has to be a completely new consciousness, especially for men, because a man needs a purpose. A man needs a purpose. That is what is going to be his driving force throughout life, okay? And you look at the rates of male suicide. What are the biggest killers of men?
Uselessness.
Well, relationship breakdown and job loss. Well, financial pressures usually incurred by job loss or like a combination of relationship breakdown and job loss.
Yep.
Okay? So what's happening there? Their purpose is being taken away. A big reason men get up in the morning and do jobs that most people fucking hate. No one wants to be a fucking garbage cleaner and do like very shitty physical jobs. Okay, why do you do it? You have a purpose. You feel useful. You're going to provide for a family. Similarly, their family, okay, their wife, they want to protect them and provide for them. And that's a calling that's actually, I think, quite natural to it. Now, that's one where I'm like, okay, I don't know how much of that is culture and how much of that has been socialized into us. But that is just my opinion, but I tend to think it's more within us. But when those two things are taken away, a man is rendered useless. He's got nothing to live for. Whereas the statistics show with women, when women lose their jobs, it's not as big of a blow to their self-esteem. A lot of them will then go into volunteer work and help out in the community. And it's pretty rare that a woman loses her family. It's usually the man who loses touch with the family. I haven't actually seen the statistics or like studies that show what happens to women when they lose touch with their family in the rare cases that a man gains custody. But I'd be interested to see that. I don't know what it is.
I'll tell you what, I bet you when a woman commits suicide, it's got something to do with a lack of connection.
Wouldn't be surprised. A big thing that, and you know, people in the, I guess, manosphere, whatever you want to call it, use it as an own to feminists is like, hey, the biggest use of antidepressants is among single women in their early 40s. And, you know, I don't think it takes a genius to
figure out
why that may be the case. But I think, man, and I'm going to do a video about this, which probably would have come out by now, but like, men need to find a new purposes. We've sort of, a lot of us sort of navigate our life and plan our life to have a really great career, fulfilling career, not just for us. That's the big difference. Most of us aren't doing a career for us. Even this is a career I love. For a long time, I was like, I want to do this because I want to be able to be a good, you know, prospect for a husband one day and be, part of it is for me too. But there's other factors at play. And another big thing men live for is to find a partner that they can feel useful towards and care for, even though now there's less care needed. I think we need new purposes. I think as a class, men need to start thinking about different ways to conduct themselves, because these two primary purposes, i.e. a major relationship and a fulfilling career that provides status and meaning and purpose, we're moving into a time where these are both very insecure. And yes, there are just systemic issues at play where you can do everything right. You can be a great worker at whatever job you do. You can be a great husband. Okay, AI might come into it and you just lose your job, even if you worked really hard and diligently for a long time. Now, I know, like we always profess on this podcast, hey, you should be trying to solidify yourself against that and constantly be learning. But for a lot of guys, that's just not feasible. And not everyone can be this sort of self-help king that's constantly trying to better themselves. A lot of people just want to work in the way that, say, I'm assuming men did in the sort of 50s, 60s, and 70s. You got a job when you were 18 to 22, and that was your job for life. It had great benefits. You could buy a house, and you retired at 65. That's not possible anymore. It's so insecure, the workforce moving forward. Okay, the AI.
Can I just add, because I think that this is actually something that I noticed in maths. You hear it all the time. Uh-huh. Every woman says the same thing, and it's because they're living in that past paradigm. They're sold something that no longer exists, what you're talking about, which is they say, I'm 28, I should have a house and be married by now. That's a constant thing that they're complaining about. And it's because back in the day, you could do that. That is really the plaything of the top 10% of society. 90% of society can't afford that shit. And, you know, like with all of these extra dynamics happening into it, it is actually quite rare that someone settles down and marries at 28 now.
In Sydney, yes. But I think we're in
rural
in
Australia,
a cultural bubble.
Yeah.
No, even if you go out, you know, to middle and lower socioeconomic areas in capital cities, there's a lot of people still buying much cheaper houses and you know, settling down really young. But I wonder when people have that complaint, like, hey, I'm 28 nowadays would be quite young to say that, but definitely by sort of early and mid 30s, hey, you know, I should have had a house by now and been married and have a kid or something. It's like, all right, how much if that is you having been picky, you know, how much that is you not being willing to settle or not opting for someone who didn't necessarily immediately fulfill your desire to feel excited and, you know, titillated. But that's a fair point. Yes, economically, that's also becoming a lot more difficult. But I still think men need to start thinking about a third purpose that isn't job and isn't woman, because those two things are very insecure. Because you can look, again, I'm not trying to this is not an attack on women as a class or feminism or anything like that, but there are just certain men who, even if they do everything right, are going to struggle in this modern dating climate. might be able to have a one-night stand now and again. They might be able to get a relationship, but will it really be a fulfilling one? I don't know. But that's why I think a way to sort of mollify against, negative mental health consequences that could come with your job being lost or your relationship being lost through no fault of your own, or not through a major fault of your own. I think it's very selfish and self-centered when people are constantly painting narratives where a relationship breakdown is purely because of the other person. Like, well, that other person, I figured out they were crazy. I figured out they were this. And it's like, all right, it's very rare to hear someone say, yeah, it was probably my fault. I never hear that. But anyway, that's another thing. But because we're very vulnerable in that state of, deep intimacy and romance. But I think young men should be asking the question, if I lose my career, if I lose a potential life partner, what is something that is still going to get me out of bed in the morning?
It's a good way to look at life.
I think that they've got to start asking that question. And actually, as a result, that's probably going to be good for your dating prospects anyway, to have a passion. That's going to be really good.
And your job.
But that shouldn't be the reason you're doing it. It should be one for your mental health. Because again, the statistics are showing this is why men are killing themselves. Okay, find a purpose other than relationship and job. Find a purpose now that's hard because, a job and a relationship is going to take up a hell of a lot of your time. But if you're in your early 20s, late teens, whatever, even mid-20s, look, any age really, even if it's, I think a good thing to do is art. You could be on welfare if look, through no fault of your own, your industry could be completely outsourced. AI could completely take over your industry, automation, blah, 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 whatever, another fucking pandemic. No, you've done nothing wrong. What can you still do that will get you out of bed in the morning? Create art. That's a beautiful thing that I think is, first of all, it's fulfilling a huge human need, and it's also going to have positive short-term impacts for your mental health and just your general well-being. But you're then expressing something that should be expressed, which is like male stories, because a lot of men just don't talk. And when they do, men tend to talk about these issues in a way that would resonate with them, which is like, well, here are the statistics and here are the graphs and here are the figures. Whereas what is probably more powerful is, hey, this is my story and this is how it affected me. This is sort of my journey, which I know a lot of men are going to roll their eyes and be like, oh, for fuck off. This is an Oprah cunt. But no, as a class, that's what I think we should be trying to do and trying to learn how to do more effectively. So I think that's a question a lot of young guys have to, again, not just young, any guy has to start asking themselves, what is that sort of third point of purpose I can give to myself? And not a lot of people have that. I mean, okay, so we're both artists. For me, art to begin with was a sort of a hobby, it was something I loved. It then just became my career. Now, if I were to lose my career, I don't know, get banned on every social platform and another pandemic hits, I can't perform anyway, which lets me it's not even that far out of the realm of possibility, those two factors colliding. But I would still be able to write. I would still be able to think. It's not artistic necessarily, but that's something I value. And that's something I want to do for the rest of my life now, is just continually amass knowledge. And I would still be able to create art, even if it's not necessarily being seen by as wide an audience. I always did it. There's always still a big part of me that does it for the love of the craft. And I also do I have other artistic endeavors that aren't, necessarily related to comedy. But I can't stress that enough. I think that I don't know what the overall solution is for this very chaotic, unpredictable dating world that we live in. And I am sort of digressing to a certain degree by talking about the problems of the dating market and now saying, hey, this is what men should be doing. But I think that may actually help alleviate some of the stress caused by the current dating and work climate. It won't necessarily solve it, but it will solve some of the stress associated with it, because, hey, you're having absolutely no luck with your career. You're having absolutely no luck with women, but hey, at least I've got this other third string to my bow in my life purpose.
I would always be, and I'm always advocating this on the self-help channel. How can I add value? Because you don't necessarily have to be adding value in terms of a monetary way. And if you do add value, money will naturally follow that anyway. As you were just saying before, everything else naturally falls into line if you are contributing in some way. And there's always something that you can be doing. Because there is a lot of wisdom. If you listen to those crime podcasts, you'll hear the criminals, and it's the same with Spanian, because they have so much time to sit there and reflect on what they did, which is essentially, I suppose, the basic design of prison. They actually are extremely insightful people. And this is why there is that real trope of prisoners going out and then volunteering for wires or the dog pound or something.
Yeah.
It's because they realize that if you are contributing in some way, you're valuable. That's what a man needs at his core. If you're adding value, by definition, you are valuable.
Absolutely. And those are some great other examples. I think maybe the artistic pursuit is great for men like us who are maybe more creative and sensitive and less physically capable of things. But I think, volunteer work, community work, pet, I think is good. But also I think if you can...
You just need that idea that you're needed. Yes. That's it. That's what men need.
You want to feel useful. And
useful.
You want to be admired, respected. But I think the sort of average idea of respect between the genders is different. I think for women, it's a lot about it is like being... Yes, feeling connection and feeling heard and understood, and that's their sort of respect. Whereas for men, it's I want to feel it sort of ties into usefulness and being needed. Because then that's sort of synonymous with I'm respected for something that I can provide. And for a big reason that I was questioning a lot of, I suppose, monogamous norms about relationships 3 years ago was, I just looked at the way marriage was presented in media and the way a lot of men spoke about it. And it looked horrible. It didn't look like any man was ever respected. It looked like he was just a little pet that was constantly being nagged, constantly being told he's a piece of crap, having to beg for sex, all this kind of just like, it looks like the most sort of like low respect situation you could possibly be in. I suppose that so much pop culture that plays on men's insecurities relates to that trope, and Breaking Bad is the perfect example. Fight Club, or the American Psycho, all these sort of film noir, male experience type works of art play on that. But then again, that's a perfect example. The people who created those fantastic pieces of art had a huge impact on everyone, not just men, but some of those are specifically definitely have had more significance on men. And I can't stress the importance of having that extra area of purpose in your life.
No. The other thing that's really interesting about art is the depth that you have to go into yourself. As I've said numerous times on this podcast, I don't, because I've just been doing it for so long, I'm not even interested if art is good or not anymore. I'm not interested in it. When I'm watching stand-up, when I'm watching a musician, every time I'm just like, that's where their head's at. And that's what they're deeply thinking about. And that fascinates me because it's truly amazing. Every time you ever see amateur musicians, ones that don't have a label behind them, which is inevitably what happens. You just get big enough and then it becomes a collaboration of ideas. But when you're in those early stages, and that's what's really charming about YouTube, when you see all these bands, you're just like, I know exactly what that person thinks as a result of their art. Their art really is a reflection of their psychology.
Yeah.
And so that's what's really there's another added feature, I suppose, is you can get value out of art, but also it's sort of you're being a psychologist to yourself. It's the stuff that if you're doing art correctly, and I think it just kind of naturally happens after you're doing art, because you realize like it's an internal pursuit, so you have to just keep driving deeper into yourself. You start figuring yourself out more. It's really interesting. It's actually the same thing that happened with the stand-up show, actually. At the end of it, I realized why it really hit me why I was actually very interested in Rome as a kid. And at the end of it, it's because it sort of sits in this halfway temporal sphere of being fact and myth, because it happened so long ago. And that's where the subconscious loves to dance. That's the dreamscape. So what actually happens with Rome is you are being told all these incredible stories. This is the thing that I never really understood as a kid, when everyone else was just like, that's boring and shit like that. And I was like, no, this isn't. This is the greatest story ever told. And it is. It's because it's a story.
It's beautiful. Yeah, because it's far enough out of our conscious memory, collective conscious memory, that there are mystical elements to it.
There's mystical elements to it.
It's fascinating, but it happened. It was real.
But it happened.
We don't know exactly what happened. We know enough about exactly what happened to then be interpretive and creative about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
yeah,
it's
Rome
and Greece in particular, because but the other thing is because their society was close enough to ours, it puts you in that, like, it's inherently much more human in a way. It's inherently much more human, ancient Rome and ancient Greece, I think, because you can put yourself in that world, but at the same time, it's kind of hitting you on a deeper level than your actual reality in a way, because it's kind of like your world plus togas and, like, you know, epic clashes of armies and Medusa and all these kind of things that actually did exist in that world. So and again, this is like more Freudian stuff, but that's more how the brain, or like how the dreamscape is, where there's just those mythical elements to it. So when you are learning about it, you're understanding humanity. Actually, it teaches you things about humanity that necessarily you won't learn, or like it drills these lessons into your mind a lot deeper than previous time, like than today would, because it's in that realm. Anyway, the point is, because I was sitting there and grappling over it for a year, I had all of these realizations about me as a person and how that shaped me. And that's the really interesting aspect of art, is if you are sitting there and the meditative process of it, I suppose, you start getting at the core of who you are. Things awaken within you that you otherwise would have never analyzed or thought about, because you just don't have the time. So if you make the time with the art, I think it actually gives you aspects of yourself that are either just running as unconscious programming, or things that you had long forgotten about that you're like, that's why I liked that. And then you can add that to yourself now. Anyway, that's, and it's definitely something that you see in Neel as well. It's like what I was talking about with that man thing. Obviously, you've been thinking about man a lot. And it's just like, look, skits is your thing. It is what made you famous. It's because you've got a particular skill in shortening, in as economical point as possible, a way of thinking. And that is obviously very valued by people. And it's obviously because of your interest in art that you were able to get to that level, and that's all well and good. So you're naturally, any skit that you do is going to be of that quality, right? And so every now and then It's actually, look, I know that I never shut up about Hamish and Andy, but it's the same thing. A bad episode of Hamish and Andy is still way better than all of those other like male radio duos because they were the best at what they did, right? So it's a cut above, and then every now and then they do something that outdoes themselves. In that skit realm, the one that overdid all the rest of it was exactly what you're talking about on this podcast, and now it makes a lot of sense why that one was just a cut above all the other skits. It's because you've been deeply thinking about this for a long time. And so when you did that evolution of, I can't even remember what it was called, evolution of man thoughts or whatever.
Evolution of Basic Man.
Evolution of Basic Man. You should check it out because
you.
it was like what I was saying with Neel. When you're watching that, it's beyond funny. It's too accurate. That's the whole fucking thing that like you are sitting, and I remember showing like some of my staff that I'm working with, and they did really have a similar reaction to me. It's just, you kind of sit there and you're just like, fuck, he's nailed it. You know, like it's because,
Thanks, man.
because he drilled really, really deep into something that he's been thinking about a lot. And that's where real art is made, I suppose. You know, that one. Yeah. So it's just like, and that's, it's a constant pursuit in art. And like with Neel's, it doesn't come by very often. It can't come by very often because you have to go to a very deep, long meditative state. You have to think about it for a long time. And that's what's like very sand painting and unfortunate about your specific art, I suppose, is that I personally appreciate it as a comedian, right? I understand that comedy is best when it's extremely economical and efficient, right? So when I look at your skits, I'm just like, that's sick that you're able to do that in 2 minutes because you've just cut it down to the rawest that you possibly can. I appreciate what's happening there, that economy. I think to everybody else, they're kind of just sitting there, and it'd be the same with me, this thing of like, it's internet-y. You know, and so naturally it's kind of just dismissed because it's the internet and it's not, you know, the budget of a fucking Christopher Nolan film or some shit, right? So it's kind of just pushed away. But, and it's not painting, I suppose, that has some, I don't know, whatever, right? Like it's just like little 2-minute internet clips. But it's amazing that in that realm, that has become your art. You've been focusing on that for so long with the combination of thinking about things so much. It's really strange that after a while, you push it to another level, you know? Like, it doesn't matter what art you're focusing on. At some point, it naturally evolves to another thing. What I'm saying there, it evolves to another level. So that was, anyway, it was very interesting seeing you using that, like something that you've been doing since you were 18. And now that you're older, like you've had so much familiarity in that format. But you've got the wisdom, I suppose, of just being older and those two things naturally converging. So anyway, I'm saying that you should look that up to see like what's happening in someone's head when they're like on their path and they're using art sort of to describe what's on their path. It's the cave painting stuff. It's just like, this is how I see the world. It was bison and men throwing spears at the bison. You know, that was...
Man, first of all, thank you. That means a lot. That was great.
Well, it definitely deserves compliments. I'll say that because it's like deceptively. I think that a lot of people, probably not actually, because I think that a lot of people will just watch that and just be like, "Fuck, that is accurate." But deceptively, I think a lot of people will just dismiss that because it's kind of just like it's a skit. Just for whatever reason, skit is lower than, you know, mosaic or whatever, right? But there's a lot of fucking thought that went into that, you know? And the true economy of that is its own form of art. But sorry, continue.
No, but what's something you said about that cave painting is rings true. Hey, this is the way I see the world. And I think more men need to, it's going to be, we live in a time now where just your labor, if you will, or your usefulness is slowly being diminished, and it's a matter of time before robots will essentially do everything. But as minuscule as your footprint may be, according to you, if you can articulate the way you see the world in an impactful and significant way, and maybe even share that on the internet, that's valuable. That is so valuable. You've given a piece of yourself to the world that will exist long after you're gone. And the power and significance of that can never be overstated.
No, because it is quite incredible. In fact, Tu every now and then shows me these kinds of things. But like, okay, look, I'm going to have to use it as always, but obviously because I've just been autistically down the rabbit hole of the Byzantine Empire, there is this poem of this guy that was around the sacking in 1204 of Constantinople. And it's just, that's the way that it's described. It's a lament. It's kind of halfway between a poem and just like his thoughts about it. It is widely regarded as one of the saddest pieces of literature ever made. And because you always just thought that, what is it like in medieval Europe being in a city that is getting sacked by barbarians or whoever it is, crusaders, Arabs, whatever, your home being completely uprooted, looking back at it and the whole fucking city's on fire. Like, what was that like? And that man gives you an insight into it. And the thing is, you read that and you will cry. That's a powerful thing. That happened, what, 800 years ago? More than 800 years ago? And his feelings and interpretation of what happened, it's like, it's truer than the factual accuracy of it, right? Like you can say anything you want about the sacking of Constantinople, that they got in this way, they took this artwork and all this kind of stuff. But like, really, at the end of the day, it was a human experience, and that man's human experience is echoed throughout the ages. It's a historically significant piece of art that I think like the Conservation Foundation of Europe or whatever was just like this is particularly important, you know? That's what true art can do.
Yes. And the more people creating and from a sort of a perspective that ironically now the narrative is that, well, you know, men always have an opinion and don't stop talking. But no, okay. I think we need to tell our stories. Not enough of them.
No.
And things have shifted dramatically just in the space of 10 years. For most men in their 20s, there's no power. You know, what power do they have?
You know what I think is
depressed. Everyone's nihilistic.
Everyone's nihilistic. And also this thing that you were saying of like, yeah, men don't cry. I think it's just they cry about different things to women. And that's the whole thing. Like, you tap into those separate emotions. It's what you're saying, right? Like, it's like the male experience is inherently different. And if you cede that realm to others, then it gets interpreted in that way. So Neel is kind of right. Everybody should be practicing some form of art in some way, because it is just a real expression of your experience, and good art allows other people to relate to it.
Yeah.
Like that thing, it was just like, dude, that fucking skit is how your brain evolved. And like, obviously, it's guesswork from 40s and 50s, but you can see, this is the whole thing that's really interesting about it. You can see your brain going down that route, because everything that you had before that was like, yeah, that was that. Just seems accurate.
Thank you, man. Thank you. Well, powerful words. Thank you. I appreciate that a lot. And, you know, I'm sure some people in the comments can bring that skit back down to earth and come back around to the tall poppy syndrome that we were talking about at the start of this podcast. Was it this podcast that we were talking about that? I think it was. But hope you enjoyed my long ramble there in the middle. And, yep, as always, shows Newcastle, Melbourne, and Sydney, neeldown.com, neelkolhatkar.com/podcast if you want to ask a question, a shout out, or topic. All the money goes to charity. Go to friendlyjordies.com. Is that your website?
Mm-hmm.
Yep. See where he's touring. He's pretty much all over Australia, right? Doing all the festivals.
At some point, yes.
Yeah. And you go all over the place. You go to like Hervey Bay and,
Yeah, I do.
towns.
I do. And I like those shows as well. I really like those shows. So come on down to them.
Man. I always get messages, well, I'll come to this town. And then I always go to those towns and like
50 people
10
rock up.
Not even 50.
10. Fuck, that's
okay.
brutal.
Okay, maybe not 10, but what was it? I did Bendigo a few years ago. And what was it? In the sort of like 27 people came. It was like good enough for
Bendigo
a show.
is brutal.
Yeah.
Bendigo is particularly brutal. Bendigo
awkward,
does
man.
not like art. They really don't.
Well, they're the ones who should be listening
like
to this
Carl.
podcast. There you go. Bendigo, create art. Tell us what it's like. Paint the picture of Bendigo and the experience, the human experience that comes with that. All right. Thank you guys very much for listening. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.